Mike Stevens froze mid-stride across the terminal floor, his coffee cup suspended inches from his lips as Atlas, his perfectly trained German Shepherd canine, suddenly broke formation and bolted toward gate B-17. The massive dog launched himself into a baby stroller with such force that a young mother stumbled backward, her scream piercing the late-night quiet of Denver International Airport. It wasn't a routine drug bust or contraband alert. Atlas was protecting something. The baby's blanket tumbled to the polished floor as passengers scattered like startled birds, their rolling luggage clattering in all directions. Security guards rushed forward, hands instinctively moving toward their weapons as the woman clutched her infant, tears streaming down her face. Mike's weathered hands trembled as he watched his partner, the same dog who had pulled him from the depths of grief 3 years ago, refuse every command to stand down. Atlas positioned himself like a sentinel between the crying woman and the approaching crowd, his amber eyes locked on something only he could sense. "Control, we have a situation at gate B-17, the radio crackled with urgent voices. But the real question hung in the air like smoke. What had Atlas discovered that made a trained police dog risk everything to disobey? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 2 years earlier, Mike Stevens had been a different man entirely. The mortgage papers scattered across his kitchen table told a story of mounting debt, $47,000 in funeral expenses, late payment notices, and a foreclosure warning stamped in red ink. Some mornings he still reached for 2 coffee cups instead of 1, muscle memory refusing to accept that Jessica and 6-year-old Ryan would never again fill the silence of their suburban Denver home. The accident had happened on a Tuesday. Black ice, an 18-wheeler that couldn't stop in time, and suddenly, Mike's world had collapsed into a series of beeping machines at Children's Hospital. Ryan had lasted 3 days, his small hand gripping Mike's fingers, while a German Shepherd therapy dog named Atlas lay quietly beside the hospital bed. "Take care of Atlas, Daddy," had been Ryan's final words, whispered through the oxygen mask that couldn't save him. Atlas had been abandoned at the hospital after his therapy program lost funding. No one wanted a 4-year-old German Shepherd with a distinctive scar on his right front paw and trauma-induced anxiety. Everyone except Mike, who saw in those amber eyes the same hollow grief that stared back at him from bathroom mirrors. The dog had lost his purpose. Mike had lost everything. Together, they found their way to the TSA K-9 unit, where broken souls were welcomed if they could still serve. Now, Atlas weighed 90 pounds of solid muscle and unwavering loyalty. His black and tan coat gleamed under the airport's fluorescent lights, ears perpetually alert to sounds only he could detect. Mike had learned to read every twitch of those pointed ears, every subtle shift in posture that meant Atlas sensed something amiss. In 2 years of partnership, the dog had never been wrong about danger. At 72, Dorothy Mae Thompson moved through Denver International's corridors with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades cleaning up after other people's messes. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her uniform pressed despite the late hour. The night shift paid better, and every extra dollar mattered when Social Security barely covered rent on her 1-bedroom apartment in subsidized housing. Dorothy carried her own grief like a worn photograph in her breast pocket. Thomas, her only son, killed by an IED in Iraq 8 years ago. No grandchildren would ever call her grandma. No holiday dinners would fill her small table. The cancer diagnosis 3 months ago had been almost a relief. At least she wouldn't grow old alone much longer. But tonight felt different. As she emptied trash bins near gate B-17, Dorothy noticed a young woman struggling with a crying baby, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. The maternal instinct that had never died stirred something fierce in Dorothy's chest. She had always believed that God put people exactly where they needed to be, exactly when they needed to be there. The woman with the baby looked terrified, constantly glancing over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. Dorothy recognized that particular brand of fear. She had worn it herself during Thomas's deployment, waiting for news that never came in time. The digital clock above gate B-17 read 11:30 p.m. when Sarah Mitchell approached the counter with shaking hands, clutching a crumpled boarding pass for the last flight to Portland. 8-month-old Danny squirmed in her arms, his fussing echoing through the nearly empty terminal. She had $347 left in her wallet, everything remaining after selling her wedding ring to a pawn shop that afternoon. The weight of the diaper bag on her shoulder felt heavier than it should, burdened with more than baby supplies. Mike Stevens was conducting his final sweep of the evening, Atlas padding silently beside him with the methodical precision of a seasoned professional. The German shepherd's ears had been twitching for the past 10 minutes, his head turning repeatedly toward the departure gates. Mike dismissed the behavior as end-of-shift restlessness. "Easy, boy," he murmured, adjusting his grip on the leash. "Just another routine night." But Atlas knew better. Deep in his chest, something primitive stirred, the same instinct that had kept his ancestors alive in the wild. The scent trail was complex: fear, sweat, desperation, and something else. Something that reminded him of small hands and hospital antiseptic, of a little boy who had whispered promises he couldn't keep. Dorothy was 3 gates away when she first noticed the young mother. 20 years of raising Thomas had given her radar for maternal distress, and this woman radiated it like heat from asphalt. The baby's cries weren't hungry or tired, they were picking up on his mother's anxiety. Dorothy set down her cleaning cart and watched as Sarah fumbled with documents at the gate counter, her free hand trembling as she tried to balance Danny while reaching into her bag. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this ticket was purchased less than 2 hours ago with a credit card that's now been reported stolen," the gate agent said, her voice carrying across the empty seating area. "I can't allow you to board." Sarah's face went white. "Please, you don't understand. I bought that ticket with my own card. My husband, my ex-husband, he must have called the bank. Please, my baby and I, we can't stay here." The gate agent shook her head with practiced indifference. "I'm sorry, but company policy—" That's when Atlas broke free. Mike felt the leash jerk from his hand as 90 pounds of German shepherd suddenly bolted across the terminal. "Atlas, heel!" he shouted, breaking into a run, but the dog was already airborne, launching himself toward the woman with the baby. Mike's heart hammered against his ribs as worst-case scenarios flashed through his mind. A mauling, a lawsuit, the end of his career. Atlas landed with his front paws on the stroller's handle, his massive frame towering over Sarah and Danny. The young mother stumbled backward, a scream tearing from her throat as she clutched her baby protectively. "No! Please don't hurt him!" The baby's blanket tumbled to the floor, and something metallic clattered across the polished tiles. A collective gasp rose from the handful of late-night travelers as they scrambled away from what looked like a weapon. Mike skidded to a halt, his trained eyes immediately cataloging the scene. An unloaded .38 revolver, scattered fake identification documents, and a manila envelope that had spilled open to reveal cash and what appeared to be medical records. But Atlas wasn't alerting to contraband. He was positioning himself protectively between Sarah and the approaching security guards, his body language reading defense, not aggression. "Everybody stay calm," Mike shouted, raising his hands as TSA agents converged on the scene. "Atlas, easy, boy, easy." Sarah was sobbing now, Danny wailing in her arms as she pressed herself against the gate counter. "You don't understand," she gasped between tears. "He's coming for us." "David, my ex-husband, he has money, connections. He'll make you give Danny back to him." Dorothy had witnessed enough domestic violence calls during her son's police academy days to recognize the signs. This wasn't a terrorist or a smuggler. This was a desperate mother running for her life. Without hesitation, she stepped forward through the circle of security personnel. "Now, hold on just a minute," Dorothy said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of 7 decades. "That dog's trying to tell us something. In all my years, I've never seen a police dog act protective unless there was real danger." Mike studied Atlas carefully. The dog's ears were forward, alert but not aggressive. His tail wasn't tucked in fear or raised in dominance. It was held steady, the position of a guardian standing watch. Most telling of all, Atlas kept glancing between Sarah and the terminal's main entrance, as if watching for an approaching threat. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the stroller and keep your hands visible," the lead TSA agent commanded. But Sarah only held Danny tighter. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "If you call the police, ask them about Dr. David Richardson. Ask them how many domestic violence reports have been filed and mysteriously disappeared. Ask them why a woman with a nursing degree and clean record would run in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on her back." Atlas whined softly and nudged Mike's leg with his nose, the same gesture he'd made in Ryan's hospital room when the machine started beeping faster. The fluorescent lights in Security Office C cast harsh shadows across Sarah's tear-streaked face as she sat across from Agent Rebecca Martinez, Danny sleeping fitfully in her arms. Atlas had refused to leave her side despite Mike's repeated commands, positioning himself like a furry sentinel between Sarah and the door. The unloaded revolver lay tagged and bagged on the metal table, along with the scattered documents that had spilled from the stroller. "Mrs. Mitchell," Agent Martinez began, her voice professionally neutral, "carrying a weapon into a federal facility is a serious crime, even if it's unloaded. But I'm more interested in understanding why you felt you needed protection." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached into Danny's diaper bag, extracting a small USB drive hidden beneath packages of formula. "Everything's on here," she whispered. "Medical records, police reports that were filed and then mysteriously dismissed, recordings I made when David thought I was sleeping." She paused, looking down at her son's peaceful face. "I'm not a criminal, Agent Martinez. I'm a pediatric nurse who made the mistake of marrying a monster." Dorothy had volunteered to stay, claiming she needed to finish cleaning the area anyway. In truth, she couldn't walk away from a young mother in distress, not when she recognized the particular brand of terror in Sarah's eyes. She'd seen it in her own mirror during Thomas's deployment, the constant fear that something precious could be stolen away at any moment. "You look familiar, honey," Dorothy said gently, settling into a plastic chair beside the interrogation table. "Have we met before?" Sarah studied the older woman's weathered face, something tugging at her memory. "You worked at Children's Hospital, didn't you? Night shift custodial about 3 years ago?" Dorothy's breath caught. "You remember me?" "Room 314, Sarah said softly. "Little boy with dark hair, maybe 6 years old. His father never left his bedside, and there was this German Shepherd therapy dog." Her voice trailed off as she looked at Atlas, who was watching the conversation with unusual intensity. Mike felt the color drain from his face. Room 314. Ryan's room. The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. Sarah had been one of Ryan's nurses during those final 3 days. She had held his son's hand when Mike stepped out to call Jessica's parents. She had hummed lullabies when the pain medication wasn't enough to let Ryan sleep. "Your little boy," Sarah continued, her voice thick with memory. "He talked about his dog Atlas every day. Said Atlas was the bravest dog in the world, and that when he got better they were going to play fetch in the backyard." Tears started fresh down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry." "I tried everything I could to make him comfortable." Atlas whined softly and pressed his massive head against Mike's leg. The dog remembered, too. remembered the scent of antiseptic and sorrow, remembered a gentle nurse who had spoken kindly to a frightened little boy. Dorothy reached across the table and covered Sarah's hand with her own gnarled fingers. "That's where I knew you from. You were the one who found Ryan's toy soldier under his bed. You made sure it was with him at the end." Mike's composure cracked. He had to step outside the interrogation room, Atlas following closely behind. In the hallway, he pressed his back against the wall and closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the impossible coincidence that had brought Sarah back into their lives. When he opened them again, Dorothy was standing in the doorway. "That dog of yours isn't just protecting any baby," she said quietly. "He's protecting Ryan's baby, in his mind at least." Look at them side by side. Danny's got the same dark hair, same brown eyes. Atlas sees what you can't bear to see. Inside the room, Agent Martinez was reviewing the contents of the USB drive on her laptop, her expression growing darker with each file she opened. Medical records showed a pattern of accidents: a broken wrist from falling downstairs, bruised ribs from slipping in the shower, a concussion from walking into a door. Audio files captured David's voice, calm and clinical, as he described how he would have Sarah declared mentally unfit and gain full custody of Danny. "Mrs. Mitchell," Agent Martinez said finally, "these recordings are disturbing, but I have to ask, why didn't you go through proper legal channels? Why run?" Sarah shifted Danny to her other arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because David isn't just my ex-husband. He's Dr. David Richardson, Chief of Orthopedic Surgery at Denver General. He has connections throughout the police department, the court system, the medical establishment. 3 times I filed domestic violence reports. 3 times they were dismissed due to insufficient evidence or conflicting statements. The last officer who took my report told me I should be grateful to have such a successful husband." The USB contained more than just evidence of abuse. It revealed David's systematic manipulation of the legal system, his use of medical contacts to discredit Sarah's credibility, and most chilling of all, audio recordings of him discussing his plans with unnamed associates. "He's not going to stop," Sarah continued. "David believes he owns Danny, that I'm an unfit mother who's standing in the way of his son's proper upbringing. He's already filed papers claiming I kidnapped Danny and stole his gun. His lawyer called the airline to report my credit card as stolen." She looked directly at Agent Martinez. "He'll be here soon. He always finds me." Mike returned to the room just as his radio crackled to life. "All units be advised. Private aircraft requesting emergency landing clearance. ETA 20 minutes. Passengers include Dr. David Richardson and legal representation." Atlas raised his head, ears pricked forward, as if he could sense the approaching threat. He moved closer to Sarah's chair, his protective instincts overriding years of training that taught him to remain neutral during investigations. Dorothy stood up slowly, her joints protesting after the long night. "Well then," she said with grim determination, "I guess we'd better figure out how to protect this baby before his father gets here." The ticking clock had begun. Agent Martinez called for backup while Mike paced the small interrogation room, Atlas matching his restless energy step for step. The German shepherd's behavior had shifted from protective to anxious, his nose constantly testing the air as if he could smell danger approaching through the terminal's ventilation system. Sarah clutched Danny closer, her nursing instincts recognizing the signs of a baby picking up on adult stress. His breathing had quickened, and his small fists clenched and unclenched against her chest. "Tell me about David's sister," Agent Martinez said, scrolling through the psychological evaluation files on the USB. "The reports mention a traumatic event that shaped his need for control." Sarah's face went pale. "Emma, she was 12 when she died from complications after routine surgery. The surgeon made an error, nicked an artery, and couldn't stop the bleeding fast enough. David was 17, watched her bleed out on the operating table while doctors scrambled to save her. She shifted Danny to her shoulder, patting his back rhythmically. He became obsessed with medical perfection after that, convinced that if you control every variable, you can prevent tragedy. It started as dedication to his surgical career, but it metastasized into controlling every aspect of the people he claimed to love. Dorothy had been listening quietly from her corner chair, but now she straightened with a sharp intake of breath. "What did you say the surgeon's name was?" "Dr. William Chen," Sarah replied. David spent years researching the case, building a file on every person involved in Emma's care. He said it helped him cope, but really it fed his obsession with blame and control. "Sweet Jesus," Dorothy whispered, her hand flying to her chest. "Dr. Chen was the surgeon who operated on my Thomas when he was brought to the field hospital." Thomas made it through surgery, but there were complications with the anesthesia. Chen was reprimanded for working beyond his abilities under combat conditions. She looked directly at Sarah. David Richardson was the intern assisting that day. Thomas died because David questioned Chen's procedure mid-surgery, caused confusion in the operating room. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Mike stopped pacing, understanding flooding his features. So David has been carrying guilt about 2 deaths, his sister's and Thomas's. That's why he's so determined to save Danny from what he perceives as your incompetence, Sarah. In his twisted mind, controlling you completely is the only way to prevent another tragedy. Atlas whined and pressed against Mike's leg, the same behavior he'd displayed in Ryan's hospital room when the machine started beeping irregularly. The dog's stress was palpable. He was remembering trauma while simultaneously sensing new danger. Agent Martinez closed her laptop with a snap. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to understand something. Based on what I'm seeing here, Dr. Richardson isn't just an abusive ex-husband. He's systematically destroyed evidence, manipulated official reports, and potentially endangered other patients through his need for control. This isn't just about custody. It's about stopping a dangerous individual who's been operating unchecked for years." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "There were other women. David showed me photos once, claimed they were previous relationships that didn't work out. All young, all in healthcare or education, all described as unstable after they tried to leave him. I was too scared to ask what happened to them." The radio crackled again. "Control. Private aircraft has landed. 3 passengers disembarking, 2 males in suits, 1 matching description of Dr. David Richardson. Legal documentation appears legitimate." Mike felt his protective instincts surge, the same feeling he'd had watching over Ryan during those final hospital days. "How long do we have?" 20 minutes, maybe 30, if traffic from the private terminal is heavy," Agent Martinez replied, already typing rapidly on her phone. "I'm requesting a federal hold on the custody documents and emergency protective services for both you and Danny, Sarah. But Richardson's lawyers are going to argue that you're a flight risk with an unregistered weapon." Dorothy stood up slowly, her arthritis protesting the sudden movement. "Agent Martinez, I've got something to say, and you need to hear it." She pulled a worn photograph from her uniform pocket. Thomas, in his army dress blues, grinning beside a younger Dorothy. "My boy died because David Richardson's arrogance got in the way of proper medical care. If that man gets custody of this baby, Danny won't just be raised by an abuser, he'll be raised by someone who has blood on his hands." Atlas suddenly alert, his ears swiveling toward the hallway. Mike recognized the signs immediately. Someone was approaching, someone whose scent or energy pattern the dog found threatening. "He's here," Mike said grimly. "Atlas always knows." The door opened, and a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stepped inside, flanked by 2 lawyers carrying briefcases. Dr. David Richardson looked exactly like the successful surgeon he was, silver hair impeccably styled, confident posture, the kind of commanding presence that filled a room. But Atlas's reaction was immediate and visceral. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest as his hackles rose. "Sarah," David said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to calming patients' families. "You've caused quite a scene. Let's get you and Danny home where you belong." "She's not going anywhere," Mike said, stepping between David and Sarah's chair. Atlas moved with him, positioning himself as a living barrier. David's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath the polished exterior. "Officer, I appreciate your dedication, but you're interfering with a family matter. I have legal custody documentation, and my wife has clearly suffered some kind of breakdown. She's stolen my property and endangered our child." "Your property?" Dorothy's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That what you called Emma, too? Your property to control and protect?" David's head snapped toward Dorothy, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered across his features. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "We met 8 years ago in Iraq. Dr. Richardson." "You were the intern who couldn't follow orders, couldn't trust the supervising surgeon, couldn't accept that some things are beyond your control." Dorothy's voice gained strength with each word. "My son Thomas died on that operating table because you created chaos in a critical moment." The color drained from David's face. "That's impossible. You're some kind of airport custodian. You weren't—" "I was the army nurse who cleaned up after your mistakes." Dorothy lied smoothly, protecting the real source of her information. "I watched you argue with Dr. Chen while my boy bled out. I saw you walk away without taking responsibility, just like you're trying to do now." Agent Martinez had been quietly recording the entire conversation. Now she stood up, her hand resting on her service weapon. "Dr. Richardson, we need to discuss some irregularities in your custody documentation. Several of the signatures appear to be forged, and the filing dates don't match court records." One of David's lawyers stepped forward. "Agent Martinez, Dr. Richardson is a respected member of the medical community. These accusations are clearly the result of a disturbed individual's fantasies." Atlas's growl intensified, and the dog took a step toward David. Mike had never seen his partner react so aggressively to someone who hadn't made an overtly threatening move. But Atlas was reading micro-expressions, body language, and pheromone patterns that humans missed. The dog knew predator energy when he sensed it. "Your dog seems agitated," David observed, his tone shifting to the clinical detachment he used in surgery. "Perhaps it should be removed from the room before someone gets hurt." "Atlas stays," Mike said firmly. "He's the best judge of character I've ever met." Sarah finally found her voice, strengthened by the support surrounding her. "David, you can't have Danny." "Not after what you've done, what you plan to do. I know about the other women, about the forged documents, about your plan to have me institutionalized." David's composure cracked completely. "You don't understand what I'm trying to protect him from. I've seen what happens when people aren't careful, when they don't maintain control. Emma died because adults couldn't do their jobs properly. Thomas died because people couldn't follow protocol. I won't let Danny become another casualty of other people's incompetence." "Including his mother's?" Agent Martinez asked quietly. "Especially his mother's," David replied, his voice now carrying the full weight of his delusion. "Sarah is sweet, caring, but she lacks the strength to make hard decisions. She needs structure, guidance, protection from her own weaknesses. Danny needs a father who can ensure his safety through proper planning and control." The room fell silent except for Danny's soft breathing and Atlas's continued low growling. Everyone present could hear the twisted logic that had driven David's escalating abuse, the genuine belief that his controlling behavior was protective rather than destructive. Agent Martinez checked her watch. "Dr. Richardson, I'm placing you under investigation for document forgery, domestic abuse, and interference with interstate custody proceedings. You'll need to surrender your passport and remain available for questioning." David's lawyers immediately began protesting, but their client held up a hand to silence them. "This isn't over, Sarah. Danny is my son, and I will protect him from your instability, with or without legal support." Atlas's hackles rose higher, and for the first time in 2 years of partnership, Mike worried that his dog might actually attack. The tension in Security Office C reached a breaking point as David's lawyers produced what appeared to be an emergency custody order, complete with a judge's signature and official seal. Agent Martinez examined the documents with growing concern. They looked legitimate, dated just hours earlier, granting David temporary custody pending a psychological evaluation of Sarah. "This can't be real," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking as she read over the agent's shoulder. "Judge Morrison retired 6 months ago. I remember because David complained about losing his reliable contact in family court." One of David's lawyers, a sharp-faced man named Harrison, smiled coldly. "Mrs. Richardson is clearly delusional. Judge Morrison came out of retirement for this emergency hearing, given the serious nature of a mother fleeing with a child and an unregistered weapon." Atlas's agitation intensified, his powerful body trembling with barely contained energy. Mike had never seen his partner so close to losing control. The dog was reading threat signals that transcended human understanding. Something about David's presence triggered every protective instinct Atlas possessed. Dorothy studied the custody papers with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades reading official documents while cleaning government offices. Agent Martinez looked at the filing stamp. It says 8:30 p.m., but the judge's signature is dated 9:15 p.m. How does a judge sign something 45 minutes before it's filed? Agent Martinez's expression darkened as she spotted the discrepancy. "Mr. Harrison, I'm going to need to verify these documents with the court. Until then, Mrs. Mitchell retains custody of her child." David's mask of professional composure finally shattered completely. "You're making a grave mistake," he said, his voice dropping to the cold tone Sarah remembered from their worst fights. "I have resources you can't imagine, connections that reach far beyond this airport. Sarah is mentally unstable. She's been having episodes, violent outbursts. The gun she carried proves her danger to our son." "That gun belonged to you," Sarah said, finding strength in the truth. "It was in your nightstand. I took it because I was terrified of what you might do when you discovered I was leaving." David laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Sarah's paranoid delusions have escalated over the past year. She believes I'm monitoring her communications, following her movements. Classic symptoms of postpartum psychosis combined with pre-existing anxiety disorders." Mike watched Atlas carefully. The German Shepherd had positioned himself directly between David and the chair where Sarah held Danny, his stance broadening with each of David's words. But it was more than protection. Atlas was displaying the same behavioral pattern he'd shown during bomb detection training, when explosive materials were present but not yet visible. "Dr. Richardson," Agent Martinez said carefully, "I'm curious about your medical assessment of your ex-wife. When did you last treat her in a professional capacity?" "I didn't need to treat her formally," David replied, his arrogance bleeding through. "I observed her daily behavior, monitored her sleep patterns, tracked her mood fluctuations. As her husband and a medical professional, I was uniquely qualified to assess her deteriorating mental state." Dorothy's weathered hands clenched into fists. "You mean you stalked and controlled her every movement?" David turned his calculating gaze on Dorothy. "You're clearly emotionally invested in this situation, ma'am. Perhaps you should recuse yourself from something that doesn't concern you." "Oh, but it does concern me," Dorothy said, rising slowly from her chair. The years fell away from her voice as she spoke with the authority of a woman who had buried her only child. "You see, Dr. Richardson, I've been carrying a secret for 8 years. I was there the night Thomas Patterson died in that Iraqi field hospital. I saw you argue with Dr. Chen, saw you refuse to follow protocol, saw you storm out when things got complicated." David's face went white. "That's impossible. The only people in that operating room were medical personnel. I was the cleaning staff member who was called in to sanitize the room afterward," Dorothy continued, her lie delivered with devastating conviction. "I saw the blood, heard the arguments through the thin walls, watched you blame everyone else for your failure to follow orders. Just like you're doing now with Sarah." Atlas suddenly lunged forward, not at David but toward his briefcase, which had been set on the floor beside his chair. The dog's nose pressed against the leather, and he began the specific alert behavior Mike recognized from drug detection work. "Atlas, what is it, boy?" Mike asked, kneeling beside his partner. David moved quickly to pull the briefcase away. "Your dog is clearly unstable, just like his handler's judgment in this situation." But Agent Martinez was faster, placing her hand on the briefcase handle. "Sir, I'm going to need to examine the contents of that bag." "You have no warrant, no probable cause," Harrison began, but Martinez cut him off. "I have a trained detection dog alerting to potential contraband. That's sufficient probable cause." She opened the briefcase despite the lawyer's protests. Inside, beneath legal documents and a laptop, they found a small vial of clear liquid and a syringe. Agent Martinez held up the vial, reading the label. "Midazolam, a powerful sedative used in medical procedures." Sarah's face went ashen. "David, what were you planning to do?" David's composure cracked further. "It's a mild sedative to help Danny sleep during the flight home. The stress of this situation has clearly agitated him." "Danny's been calm all night," Mike interrupted. "The only time he's fussed is when you've been in the room." Atlas was now showing full alert behavior, his training taking over as he detected more than just the sedative. His nose led him to David's coat pocket, where he sat and stared, the unmistakable signal for narcotics detection. Agent Martinez approached David with her hand on her weapon. "Sir, I need you to slowly remove whatever's in your coat pocket." David's lawyer stepped forward. "This is harassment. Dr. Richardson is a respected physician carrying legal medical supplies." "Step back, Mr. Harrison," Martinez ordered. "Dr. Richardson, your pocket. Now." With shaking hands, David produced a small prescription bottle. The label had been partially removed, but Agent Martinez could make out traces of text indicating a controlled substance. "Rohypnol," she read aloud. "Date rape drug. Dr. Richardson, you're under arrest." The room erupted in chaos. David's lawyers began shouting about illegal searches while David himself seemed to retreat into some internal space where his delusions still made sense. "You don't understand," he said, his voice taking on an eerie calm. "Sarah needs help. She's been having episodes, forgetting to feed Danny, leaving him alone. I've been documenting everything, protecting him from her neglect." Sarah stood up abruptly, Danny still in her arms. "I never left him alone." "You installed cameras in our home, recorded everything I did, made me second-guess every decision until I was afraid to move without your permission." "Because you needed guidance," David shouted, his facade finally collapsing completely. "You're weak, impulsive, incapable of making rational decisions. Emma died because adults couldn't handle responsibility. Thomas died because people couldn't follow simple protocols. I won't let Danny become another casualty of incompetence." Atlas stepped forward, placing himself directly in front of Sarah and Danny. His protective stance was absolute, 90 pounds of muscle and loyalty standing between a predator and his intended victims. Mike felt a surge of pride in his partner, mixed with the terrible clarity of understanding. You've been drugging her, haven't you? The episodes you documented? You caused them. David's eyes held the flat, dead look of someone whose reality had become completely disconnected from truth. I monitored her medication intake, adjusted dosages as needed for her own protection. Sometimes people need help making healthy choices. Dorothy sank back into her chair, the weight of revelation heavy on her shoulders. Sweet Lord, how many women have you done this to? I protected them all, David said with chilling conviction. Some were more resistant to help than others, but I always acted in their best interests. Agent Martinez was already on her radio calling for additional units and medical personnel. We need a full investigation into Dr. Richardson's patient records, prescription history, and any missing persons reports involving his former relationships. Sarah was sobbing now, not from fear but from relief. I thought I was going crazy. The memory lapses, the confusion, the times I'd wake up and hours would be missing. Classic symptoms of benzodiazepine poisoning, Mike said grimly. He's been systematically destroying your mental stability to justify his control. Atlas remained vigilant, his amber eyes never leaving David. The dog understood on an instinctual level what the humans were struggling to process. The man before them was fundamentally broken, dangerous in ways that went beyond physical violence. As additional security personnel entered the room to formally arrest David, he made one final desperate play. Sarah, you know I love you. Everything I did was to protect our family. You can't raise Danny alone, you're not strong enough. But Sarah had found her voice, strengthened by the truth and surrounded by people who believed her. David, I was strong enough to survive you. I'm strong enough to protect my son from you. And I'm strong enough to make sure you never hurt another woman the way you hurt me. David was led away in handcuffs, still insisting that everyone else was wrong, that his actions had been justified and necessary. His lawyers followed, already discussing bail arrangements and character witnesses. As the room emptied, Atlas finally relaxed, his tail wagging slowly as he nuzzled against Danny's tiny hand. The baby gurgled with delight, apparently recognizing the dog as a friend rather than a threat. The immediate danger had passed, but the aftermath was just beginning. The fluorescent lights of Security Office C suddenly seemed too bright as Dorothy clutched her chest, her weathered face draining of color. The stress of confronting David, combined with the weight of lies she'd told to protect Sarah, had triggered something deeper than exhaustion. She tried to wave away Mike's concerned look, but her breathing had become shallow and labored. I'm fine. Just need a moment, she insisted, but her voice carried the tremor of someone fighting against their own body's rebellion. The cancer treatment she'd been skipping to afford rent had weakened her more than she'd admitted to anyone, even herself. Atlas immediately shifted his attention from Sarah and Danny to Dorothy, padding over to press his warm body against her legs. The German Shepherd's instincts, honed by years of therapy work before his canine training, recognized medical distress even before the humans in the room fully processed what was happening. Dorothy, you need to sit down, Mike said firmly, guiding her back to the plastic chair. But as she lowered herself down, her knees buckled and she collapsed sideways, her cleaning uniform catching on the chair's metal arm. Sarah, still holding Danny, felt her nursing training kick in despite her own emotional exhaustion. She's having a cardiac episode. Mike, call for paramedics, now! Agent Martinez was already on her radio while Sarah knelt beside Dorothy, checking her pulse with one hand while balancing Danny with the other. The older woman's heartbeat was rapid and irregular, her skin clammy with the particular cold sweat that preceded serious medical emergencies. Dorothy, stay with us, Sarah murmured, her voice taking on the gentle authority she'd used with countless patients. You're going to be okay. Help is coming. But Dorothy's eyes were unfocused, her breathing increasingly labored. She grabbed Sarah's wrist with surprising strength. I lied, she whispered. About being there when Thomas died. I wasn't, I wasn't in Iraq. I was here, cleaning these same floors, waiting for news that never came in time. Tears streamed down Dorothy's cheeks as the truth poured out. I kept his room exactly the same for 2 years after the funeral. His baseball trophies, his high school yearbook, even his dirty laundry in the hamper because it still smelled like him. I couldn't let go. Mike felt his own chest tighten with recognition. He'd done the same thing with Ryan's room, frozen in time like a shrine to interrupted childhood. Dorothy, save your strength. The paramedics. No, she interrupted, her grip on Sarah's wrist becoming desperate. I need you to understand. When I saw you tonight with that baby, running from danger, I saw myself 8 years ago, helpless, waiting for someone else to save what mattered most. I couldn't save Thomas, but maybe I could help save Danny. Atlas whined softly and laid his massive head across Dorothy's lap, offering comfort in the way only animals could, without judgment, without expectation of explanation. Sarah shifted Danny to one arm and used her free hand to stroke Dorothy's gray hair. You did help save him. You stood up to David when you didn't have to. You risked everything for strangers. Not strangers, Dorothy whispered, her voice growing weaker. Family. Thomas always said family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when everything falls apart. She looked directly at Mike. Your boy Ryan, he was in my hospital. Different floor, but I knew about him. Heard the nurses talking about the little boy with the dog, how brave he was, how much his daddy loved him. Mike's vision blurred with tears. You saw Ryan? I cleaned his room the night he passed. Found his toy soldier under the bed, made sure the nurses put it with him. Dorothy's breathing became more labored. I wanted to tell you then that you weren't alone, that someone else understood what it meant to lose everything. But I was just the cleaning lady. Who was I to interrupt a father's grief? The paramedics burst through the door just as Dorothy's eyes rolled back and her body went limp. Sarah immediately began chest compressions while the EMTs unpacked their equipment, her nursing skills taking over as she counted compressions and monitored Dorothy's responses. She's got a history of cancer, probably hasn't been keeping up with treatments, Sarah called out to the lead paramedic. Pulse is thready, blood pressure dropping. We need to get her to Denver General immediately. As they loaded Dorothy onto a stretcher, she regained consciousness long enough to grab Mike's hand. Don't let them separate, she gasped. Sarah and the baby. They need each other. And you need them too. Atlas followed the stretcher as far as the doorway, his whimpering echoing through the corridor as the woman who had shown him kindness was wheeled away. Mike felt a crushing sense of déjà vu. Another hospital, another person he cared about disappearing behind ambulance doors. Agent Martinez approached Sarah, who was standing in the now empty security office holding Danny and staring at the bloodstain on the floor where Dorothy had collapsed. Mrs. Mitchell, I know this has been traumatic, but we need to discuss your immediate situation. David's been arrested, but his lawyers are already working on bail arrangements. Sarah's voice was barely audible. She didn't have to lie for me. She didn't even know me, and she put herself at risk because she thought it was right. That's what good people do, Mike said quietly. They show up when it matters, even when it costs them everything. Danny had been fussing throughout the medical emergency, picking up on the adult stress around him. Now, as the immediate crisis passed, he began crying with the persistent wail of a baby who needed feeding and changing, but couldn't understand why his world had become so chaotic. Sarah looked around the sterile security office, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of her situation. Dorothy was fighting for her life in an ambulance. David was in custody, but would likely make bail within hours. She had nowhere to go, no family to call, and less than $300 to her name. I don't know what to do now, she admitted, her own tears finally starting. I can't go back to Denver. I can't afford to stay here. And Dorothy. Her voice broke completely. Atlas padded over and sat directly in front of her, his amber eyes locked on hers with the kind of steady presence that transcended species. The dog understood grief, understood loss, and understood the particular courage it took to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. Mike made a decision that surprised even himself. "You're coming with us. To the hospital first, to check on Dorothy. Then we'll figure out the rest." "Mike, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted. Dorothy was right. Family isn't just blood. It's who shows up when everything falls apart. And right now, we're all the family each other has. Agent Martinez nodded approvingly. "I'll arrange for protective custody documentation and expedite the emergency restraining order. David won't be able to get near you or Danny while this investigation continues." As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Atlas remained close to Sarah's side, his protective instincts now extending to both her and Danny. The dog understood what the humans were still learning, that sometimes the most important rescues weren't about saving people from external threats, but about saving them from the crushing isolation of facing those threats alone. The real test of their makeshift family was just beginning. The waiting room at Denver General's cardiac unit smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the worried faces of people clinging to hope. Mike sat beside Sarah, Atlas curled at their feet while Danny slept fitfully in his mother's arms. They had been waiting for 3 hours, and each minute stretched like an eternity. Dr. Patricia Coleman emerged from the intensive care unit at 6:15 a.m., her scrubs wrinkled and her expression carefully neutral in the way that medical professionals perfected when delivering life-changing news. "Are you here for Dorothy Thompson?" Mike stood immediately, his hand instinctively reaching for Sarah's shoulder. "How is she?" "Stable but critical. She suffered a massive cardiac event, complicated by severe anemia and malnutrition. When did she last receive cancer treatment?" "Doctor." Coleman's voice carried the professional concern of someone who had seen too many patients skip care due to financial constraints. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Cancer treatment? She never mentioned—" "Stage 2 breast cancer, diagnosed 4 months ago. According to her records, she attended 2 chemotherapy sessions and then stopped coming. No insurance coverage for the full treatment protocol." Dr. Coleman consulted her tablet. The stress of tonight's events essentially caused her weakened system to crash. Mike felt the familiar weight of guilt settling on his shoulders. Another person in his orbit suffering while he remained oblivious to their pain. "Can we see her?" "Family only, I'm afraid." "We are family," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "Maybe not by blood, but Dorothy risked her life for my son tonight. That makes us family." "Doctor." Coleman studied the unlikely trio, a K-9 officer, a young mother with a baby, and a German shepherd who seemed to understand every word being spoken. "ICU visiting hours are restricted, but I'll make an exception. 10 minutes. Dorothy looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, dwarfed by monitors and IV lines that beeped and hummed with mechanical persistence. Her skin was translucent, her breathing assisted by an oxygen cannula that emphasized how fragile her hold on life had become. Atlas approached the bed cautiously, his nose working to process the complex scent signature of illness and medication. When Dorothy's eyes fluttered open and focused on him, a weak smile crossed her face. "Hello, beautiful boy," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the heart monitor's steady rhythm. Mike pulled chairs close to the bed, while Sarah shifted Danny to one arm, reaching out to take Dorothy's hand with the other. "You scared us," Sarah said gently. "The doctor says you've been fighting cancer alone." Dorothy's laugh was more of a wheeze. "Couldn't afford the fight and the rent both. Figured I'd rather spend my last months helping people than lying in a hospital bed feeling sorry for myself." She squeezed Sarah's hand with surprising strength. Did they catch him? David? He's in custody, Mike confirmed. Agent Martinez says the charges are serious enough that bail will be difficult. You helped save Danny, Dorothy. You helped save both of them. Tears gathered in Dorothy's eyes. Thomas would have liked this, knowing his mama finally did something that mattered. She looked at Danny, sleeping peacefully despite the strange surroundings. He looks so much like Ryan when he sleeps. Same peaceful expression, same way of curling his fists. Sarah had been processing something since seeing Dorothy's medical chart. Dorothy, what if I told you that you don't have to fight alone anymore? I'm a pediatric nurse, but I know oncology protocols, and Mike, she looked at him questioningly. My insurance through the TSA has emergency-dependent coverage, Mike said, understanding immediately. If Dorothy were legally considered my family, she'd qualify for full treatment. Dorothy's eyes widened. You can't. I'm not your responsibility. You became our responsibility the moment you chose to protect Danny, Sarah interrupted. Family takes care of family, remember? You taught us that. Atlas placed his massive head on the edge of Dorothy's bed, close enough for her to stroke his ears. The contact seemed to strengthen her, some essential energy passing between the woman who had lost her son and the dog who understood grief better than most humans. There's something else, Dorothy said, her voice gaining clarity as she spoke. About David and the night Thomas died. I wasn't completely lying earlier. Mike leaned forward. What do you mean? I was working at the hospital the night they brought Thomas home. Not in Iraq, here in Denver, at the VA hospital where they transferred him after the field surgery. I saw the medical reports, heard the doctors discussing what went wrong during his initial treatment. Dorothy's breathing became labored with emotion. David Richardson was listed as the assisting surgeon who questioned protocol during a critical procedure. Thomas died from complications that could have been prevented if David had followed orders instead of trying to prove himself. The revelation hit Mike like a physical blow. So David really was responsible for Thomas's death? Indirectly. His arrogance and need to control the situation caused confusion during emergency surgery. Just like he tried to control Sarah, tried to control Danny's entire future. Dorothy's voice strengthened with conviction. That man has been leaving destruction in his wake for years, hiding behind his medical credentials and social connections. Sarah shifted Danny to her other arm, processing the implications. How many other families has he destroyed? How many other women has he drugged and manipulated? Before anyone could respond, Agent Martinez appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. David Richardson made bail an hour ago. The heart monitor's beeping accelerated as Dorothy's stress levels spiked. He's coming for Danny. Not if I can help it, Mike said firmly. Martinez, what's our legal standing? The restraining order is in place, but Richardson's lawyers are challenging Sarah's custody on grounds of mental incompetence. They're claiming the stress of tonight's events proves she's unfit to care for a child. Agent Martinez consulted her notes. They've also filed a motion claiming Atlas attacked Richardson unprovoked, requesting that the K-9 unit be investigated for excessive force. Atlas's ears perked up at the mention of his name, and he pressed closer to Dorothy's bed as if sensing the renewed threat. Dorothy struggled to sit up despite the monitors and IV lines. Over my dead body, that baby stays with his mother, and that dog stays with Mike. I don't care what lies David's lawyers are telling. Dorothy, please rest, Sarah urged, but the older woman was already reaching for the call button. Nurse, Dorothy called when someone responded. I need to speak with someone about changing my emergency contact information and medical power of attorney. It's urgent. Dr. Coleman returned within minutes, along with a social worker and a legal aid representative who happened to be on call for patient advocacy issues. Dorothy's request was unusual, but not unprecedented. Trauma patients often reevaluated their family connections after life-threatening events. I want to officially designate Mike Stevens as my next of kin and Sarah Mitchell as my medical power of attorney," Dorothy announced with surprising strength. "I'm an elderly woman with no living relatives, and these people have shown me more genuine care in one night than I've experienced in 8 years of loneliness." The social worker looked concerned. "Mrs. Thompson, this is a significant legal decision. Are you certain you understand the implications?" "I understand that family isn't about DNA," Dorothy replied firmly. "It's about who shows up when you need them most. These people showed up for me when they had every reason to walk away." As the paperwork was prepared, Agent Martinez received another call. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she listened to the voice on the other end. "That was the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit," she announced after hanging up. "They've been investigating David Richardson's medical practice for insurance fraud and illegal prescription distribution. Apparently, tonight's arrest gave them enough probable cause to execute search warrants on his office and home." Mike felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. "What did they find?" "Evidence of systematic abuse spanning at least 7 years. Medical records showing he's been drugging multiple women, including his previous wife who died under suspicious circumstances." Agent Martinez paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sarah, you weren't his first victim. You were just the first one strong enough to escape." The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a shroud. Dorothy reached out and gripped both Mike's and Sarah's hands, her strength surprising despite her weakened condition. "Then we make sure he never hurts another woman again," she said with fierce determination. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, some fights are worth having, even if they're the last ones you'll ever have." Atlas raised his head and looked directly at Dorothy, as if understanding that the real battle was just beginning. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of a modest 2-story house in suburban Denver, casting golden rectangles across a table set for 4. The smell of pancakes and coffee filled the air, mixed with the sound of a baby's delighted laughter and the gentle thump of a German shepherd's tail against hardwood floors. Sarah stood at the stove, humming the same lullaby she had once sung to comfort Ryan Stevens in his hospital bed, the melody now carrying hope instead of sorrow. Danny, now 14 months old and taking his first tentative steps, clutched the kitchen table's edge while Atlas patiently allowed the toddler to use his sturdy back as a support rail. "Papa Mike!" Danny squealed with delight as Mike emerged from the hallway, his TSA uniform pressed and ready for another day at the airport. The title had evolved naturally over the months, not replacing the father Danny would never remember, but creating something new and equally precious. Mike scooped Danny into his arms, marveling at how much the child had grown since that terrifying night at the airport. The baby's dark hair had thickened, and his brown eyes sparkled with the confidence of a child who had never known a moment's doubt about being loved and protected. "Good morning, little man," Mike said, planting a kiss on Danny's forehead. "Did you sleep well?" "Atlas!" Danny pointed enthusiastically at the German shepherd, who had become his constant companion and self-appointed guardian. The dog's transformation had been as remarkable as the family's, no longer the anxious, protective canine from the airport, but a gentle therapy dog who seemed to understand that his most important job was keeping one small boy safe and happy. Dorothy emerged from her bedroom, moving slowly but steadily on legs that had grown stronger with proper medical care and the will to live for something beyond herself. Her gray hair was neatly braided, and she wore the comfortable clothes of someone who no longer had to worry about affording both medication and rent. The cancer was in remission, pushed back by aggressive treatment that Mike's insurance had covered without question. "Morning, family," she said, settling into her chair at the table with the satisfied sigh of someone who had found their place in the world. "Sarah, honey, you're spoiling us with these breakfasts." Sarah turned from the stove, her face glowing with a contentment that would have been unimaginable during those dark months with David. "Spoiling you? Dorothy, you got up at 5 a.m. to prep Danny's bottles and fold his laundry. If anyone's doing the spoiling—" The easy banter was interrupted by Atlas's alert behavior, ears pricked, head tilted toward the front door. But this was different from his protective stance at the airport. This was anticipation, not alarm. "Must be the mailman," Mike said, but checked his watch. "Bit early, though." The doorbell rang, and Atlas padded to the door with his tail wagging. Through the front window, they could see a woman in a business suit standing on their porch, holding an official-looking folder. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Would there ever be a time when unexpected visitors didn't trigger memories of David's manipulation and control? Mike noticed her reaction immediately and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'll get it," he said calmly. "Atlas seems happy about whoever it is." The woman at the door identified herself as Linda Morrison from the Department of Health and Human Services. Her smile was genuine as she petted Atlas, who had apparently appointed himself as the official greeter for all visitors. "Mrs. Mitchell?" she asked, looking past Mike to where Sarah stood in the doorway, Danny in her arms. "I have some news about the David Richardson case that I think you'll want to hear." They gathered in the living room, a space that had been carefully arranged to be both comfortable and child-safe. Danny played contentedly on a blanket with his toys, while Atlas stretched out beside him like a furry fortress. Dorothy took her usual spot in the rocking chair that Mike had bought specifically for her, the same chair where she read bedtime stories to Danny every night. "Dr. Richardson pled guilty to all charges yesterday," Linda began, consulting her folder. "Domestic abuse, drugging and assault, medical malpractice, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. He'll serve a minimum of 25 years in federal prison." Sarah felt a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying suddenly lift from her chest. 25 years? The evidence was overwhelming once other victims came forward. 7 women total, spanning 12 years. "Your courage in escaping and preserving evidence on that USB drive gave them the strength to speak up." Linda's voice carried deep respect. "You saved not just yourself and Danny, but potentially dozens of other women who might have become his victims." Mike reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. Over the months, their relationship had deepened from mutual protection to genuine affection to something that felt like destiny. They hadn't rushed into anything. Both carried too much healing to hurry, but love had grown naturally in the space created by trust and shared purpose. "There's more," Linda continued. "Dr. Richardson's assets have been liquidated to provide restitution to his victims. Sarah, you're entitled to a substantial settlement that should ensure Danny's education and your family's security for years to come." Dorothy leaned forward in her rocking chair. "What about his medical license?" "Permanently revoked. He'll never practice medicine again." Linda closed her folder and looked around the room, taking in the scene of domestic tranquility. "I have to say, this is one of the most positive outcomes I've seen in my 15 years doing this work. You've built something beautiful here." Atlas chose that moment to demonstrate his latest trick, gently picking up one of Danny's dropped toys and placing it back within the toddler's reach. Danny clapped with delight and Atlas's tail wagged with the pride of a job well done. "He's been doing that all week," Sarah laughed. "Atlas has appointed himself as Danny's personal assistant." "More than that," Mike said, watching his partner with deep affection. "He's been teaching Danny about loyalty, protection, and unconditional love, things every kid should learn." After Linda left, the family settled into their weekend routine. Mike spread newspapers on the living room floor while Danny crawled around, exploring everything with the fearless curiosity of a secure child. Sarah worked on her laptop, She had returned to school to complete her nurse practitioner degree with the goal of specializing in trauma recovery. Dorothy sat in her rocking chair, working on a baby blanket for Danny's upcoming second birthday. Her fingers were slower than they once were, but the cancer treatments had given her time to finish the important things. The blanket was soft yellow wool, knitted with a pattern of paw prints around the border, a tribute to the dog who had saved them all. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Sarah said, looking up from her studies. "That night at the airport, when Atlas first jumped into Danny's stroller. What if he hadn't? What if he'd just done his normal patrol and let us board that plane?" Mike considered this. "David would have found you eventually. He had resources, connections, determination, but you would have been alone when it happened." "That's what I mean," Sarah said. "Atlas didn't just stop a crime that night. He brought us together. He gave us each other." Dorothy paused in her knitting. "I've been thinking about that too. Thomas used to say that everything happens for a reason, even when we can't see the reason at the time." She looked at Danny, who was now contentedly chewing on one of Atlas's rope toys while the dog watched tolerantly. Maybe Atlas knew something we didn't. Maybe he could sense that we all needed each other. Atlas raised his head at the mention of his name, his amber eyes moving from person to person as if taking inventory of his pack. Satisfied that everyone was safe and accounted for, he laid his head back down next to Danny, who immediately used the dog's side as a pillow. Mike's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it and smiled. "The TSA wants to do a feature story about Atlas for their newsletter. The Canine Who Saved Christmas, they're calling it." "Christmas?" Sarah asked. "Well, he did give us all the greatest gift imaginable," Mike replied, gesturing around the room. "A family." As afternoon faded into evening, they prepared Danny for bed with the established routine that had become sacred to all of them. Mike gave the bath while Sarah prepared the bottle. Dorothy read the bedtime story. Tonight it was the Velveteen Rabbit, Danny's current favorite, while Atlas curled up beside the crib like a guardian angel with fur. Before they turned out the lights, Sarah leaned over to kiss Danny goodnight. The toddler reached up with his small hand and touched her face, a gesture that never failed to remind her of how close she had come to losing everything. "Sweet dreams, my brave boy," she whispered. "Atlas is watching over you." As they quietly left Danny's room, the three adults gathered in the kitchen for their nightly cup of tea, a ritual Dorothy had instituted as a way of processing the day and planning for tomorrow. "I got a call from the hospital today," Dorothy said, wrapping her hands around her warm mug. "They want me to help train therapy dogs for the children's ward. Apparently, Atlas has inspired a whole program for using rescue dogs to help traumatized kids." Mike smiled. "He'd love that. Give him a chance to help other children the way he helped Danny." Sarah looked out the window at the neighborhood where they had built their new life. "You know what the best part is? Danny will grow up knowing he's surrounded by people who chose to love him, not because they had to, but because they wanted to." "That's what real family is," Dorothy said with the wisdom of her 73 years. "People who show up when it matters, who stay when it's hard, and who love without conditions or expectations." Atlas padded into the kitchen, completing their circle as he always did, and settled at their feet with a contented sigh. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season, covering their neighborhood in a blanket of peace and possibility. Sometimes the most beautiful families aren't born. They're built by hearts brave enough to love when it matters most. Dorothy Thompson, at 72, thought her chance for family had passed with her son's death in Iraq. Mike Stevens, drowning in grief after losing his wife and child, believed his purpose had died with them. Sarah Mitchell, fleeing with her baby from an abusive husband, felt utterly alone in the world. But one German shepherd named Atlas saw what they couldn't, that broken souls often make the strongest bonds. When Atlas leaped into that baby stroller at Denver Airport, he wasn't just protecting a child from danger. He was bringing together 3 generations who desperately needed each other. Dorothy found the grandchild she'd always dreamed of. Mike discovered that love doesn't diminish when shared, it multiplies. Sarah learned that real strength comes from accepting help, not refusing it. And little Danny, he grew up surrounded by people who chose him not from obligation, but from pure love. This is what family truly means: showing up when everything falls apart, staying when it gets difficult, and loving without conditions. Sometimes angels have 4 paws, and sometimes miracles happen in the most unexpected places. What family member, blood or chosen, showed up for you when you needed them most? Have you ever experienced the kind of unconditional love that changes everything? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.